All right, so we're going to create these 3 steps. Number 1, number 2, and number 3. Create the purchase order first. Vendor 4001. Material coffee beans. Quantity 100. Right? That's it. Save. We've got our PO. Copy it. Now by this point, you should be very well versed with the basics of PO, GR, IR. So that's the reason why I'm not going into the details. If you are not well versed, then you better go back to the previous chapters. All right, so go back, go to goods movement. Now we are doing step number 2 here. Now this step is done. We have ordered for 100 kilos of coffee. Now after some time, the goods are coming in. And that's what we're going to do now. We are going to receive the goods. So put the purchase order number that we copied in there. Enter. And how much did we receive? We received 100 kilos. We are saying item OK. And where did we receive it? Into our coffee storage location. And save. Okay, so the material document is posted. So step number 2 is done. Now we are going to do step number 3, which is receiving the invoice. So we have raised a purchase order, received the goods, and after some time, of course, we got to pay. And to pay, we have to receive the invoice. So the vendor is now going to send the invoice. And we're going to receive it into the system. How do you do that? Miro. Then when did we receive the invoice? This is the invoice date against this purchase order. Hit enter. And we are receiving an invoice for a quantity of 100, right? And what's the amount? $1,000. So we're going to put an amount of $1,000 here. Hit enter and save it. All right. Our invoice is saved. Let's go back to the PO. Hit enter and see the purchase order history. Now remember, purchase order history is where you see all the transactions that has happened to that purchase order. Now what has happened here? We have created a GR, we have created an IR. Let's see if those transactions are tacked on to the purchase order. Purchase order history. And of course you see the material document, which is the goods receipt, and the invoice that we have created. Okay, so far so good. The transaction is complete. Now, remember, the goal of this chapter is to do the return. And how do we do the return? Returns, typically inventory-based returns, are done with reference to the GR. So with reference to the GR, you create a return delivery. And where do you do it? In MyGo. So let's do that. So let's copy this material document. Control C. Go back. Now go to MyGo. And instead of a goods receipt, we do a return delivery. Right? Now this is something we are doing for the first time. So pay attention. All along, we have been doing MyGo for goods receipt only. Right? Now, MyGo is a transaction that we can use to do so many different things. What are those different things? Returns delivery is one of them. So how do you do a returns delivery? like I said, with reference to the goods receipt. So we select goods receipt here and we select material document and we paste the material document in here and hit enter. The system automatically pulls the quantity, storage location, plant, and all that stuff. So what this means is you have received a quantity of 100 pounds of coffee or kilos of coffee in this goods receipt. Now what do you want to do? How much do you want to return? Well, you could return the entire 100 quantity, or in our case, we want to return 50 kilos. Remember, we said there are 250 kilo bags that were delivered. One of the bag was gone. So we're going to return one of the bags, right? Click item OK and click save. Now what does it ask you? It says enter reason for movement. Now, why does it ask you this question? It didn't ask you this question when you're trying to receive the goods. Well, this is a customization behind the scenes. Don't worry about it. We'll get to it when we get to inventory management. But for now, let's just say reason for goods movement. Go there and select a reason why we are returning it. It could be poor quality, but in this case, basically it's damaged, right? So I'm going to say damaged and save. Well, that looks pretty intuitive, right? What we are trying to do is give a reason why we are returning the goods. And why we are putting that reason is pretty obvious, right? When we return goods, you obviously put a reason. Go to Amazon, you return goods, you put a reason there. The thing is broken or it doesn't fit me, stuff like that. All right, so go back and this step here is complete. And now what's the next step? The next step is to do a credit memo, right? So what's a credit memo? It's something similar to an invoice. But when we receive the goods, we have to pay the vendor. That's called an invoice that we receive from the vendor. But when we return the goods, the vendor is going to give us a credit memo. What's a credit memo? Let me take the Amazon example. If you buy some goods from Amazon, you pay Amazon, right? So Amazon sends you an invoice, you pay Amazon. Well, you just pay it right on the website. But if you think of a B2B scenario, Amazon gives you an invoice, you pay Amazon. But what if you return goods to Amazon? Now, Amazon owes you money, right? In this case, the vendor, ABC Foods 4001, is like Amazon, and you're returning some of the stuff back to Amazon. Now, what happens? The vendor owes you money. So he gives you what's called as a credit note or credit memo. What is a credit memo? It says, I have to pay you so much. Earlier, an invoice says, you have to pay me so much. A credit memo is exact opposite of an invoice. It says, I owe you money. Right? So we need to document the credit memo just like the way we document an invoice. And how do you do that? Same transaction, Myro. And instead of an invoice, select credit memo. See, it's not all that complicated, right? Only these three transactions, purchase order, Myro, MyGo. These are the transactions that we use to create all the P2P steps. Now, what's the amount for? The amount the vendor is going to send the credit memo is for 50 pounds, right? It's not 100 pounds, it's 50 pounds. And the amount is going to be for 500, right? Now, when you change the quantity to 50, you see that the amount does not change. Now, this is weird, right? When you change the quantity, the corresponding amount should change. But it's not changing here. Well, the reason is SAP has left that to us. So if you want that quantity to change according to the amount or vice versa, you can customize it. But SAP says, I'm not going to change it because we don't know what amount the vendor is going to give a credit for. Sometimes the vendor might take some charges. Like if you buy something on Amazon or Best Buy and return it, there is something called as a restocking fee, right? So similarly, there could be some charges that the vendor could levy. So it's not always, a one-to-one relationship between quantity and amount. But if you really want the amount to change with quantity, meaning if you put 50 here, this should automatically go down to 500. 50 into 10, 500. In order for you to see that, there is a parameter that you can change. It's not a configuration, it's a personalization, meaning it doesn't apply to the entire organization. It applies only to you. If you want to have that control, you can have it with a parameter. What is that parameter? Do you want to post? No. Go to personalization using transaction SU3. You could use that, or you could use system, user profile, set data, any of these. Okay, and go to parameters, and over here put in IV, amount, adjust, and then put an X there and click save. Okay, now go back to Miro. Put your purchase order number in there, and the quantity that we are receiving a credit memo for is 50. Now observe the amount column. So I've just entered 50 and hit enter. You see what happened? The amount automatically changed to the corresponding amount for that quantity. 50 multiplied by 10 is 500. If you put 25, it's going to automatically change to 250. Right? So that's that. We're going to change it back to 50, and we are going to receive that for $500, make the balance as 0, and save it. All right, so we have created this in Miro. So whether it's a goods receipt or a return delivery, you do the transaction in Miro. Whether it's an invoice receipt or credit memo, you do those transactions in Miro. So what have we done now? We have just completed the return of 50 kilos of coffee. And how did we do that? We created a return delivery with respect to PO. This is with respect to material document. This one is with respect to PO. All right. Now let's go back to the PO and see the PO history. So our invoice is complete, or credit memo is complete. Let's go back to the PO. Open the PO and go to purchase order history. You see that? There is a goods movement for 100, which is the inbound receipt. And then there is a goods movement outbound called return delivery for 50. So 50 has gone out of stock. How does it go out of stock? Well, we have created a movement here. But the next time the vendor comes in with his truck and all, he'll take the 50 kilo bag, put it in his truck, and take it back. As simple as that. So it's a pure inventory movement from our perspective. Right? There is no shipment involved. There is no packing, nothing of that sort. There is another way to do these things which involves all the logistics, but let's not discuss that here. This is a simple inventory movement. We receive the goods, we send the goods out. There's no shipping, there's no packing, there's no labeling, any of that stuff. And then we have two invoices. One is an invoice receipt, where we receive an invoice for a quantity of 100, the original invoice. And then we have a credit memo for a quantity of 50. Right? Sorry, let's go to the delivery schedule tab. and observe this field called the open quantity. What does it say? It says 50. What does it mean? The original PO was for 100. We needed 100 pounds or kilos of coffee. We have originally received 100 pounds of coffee, right? But we have sent out 50. So we only received a net of 50 pounds of coffee. And what does this mean? This means that we are yet to receive 50 kilos of coffee, right? And that's called as an open quantity. An open quantity basically says we are yet to receive 50 kilos of coffee. How does the system know that? Very simple. 100 minus 50 is 50, right? So whatever was expected is the PO quantity, and whatever we got is the GR quantity, and whatever is remaining, of course, is open quantity. So in the next chapter, we're going to discuss a little bit about this open quantity and how to close it, how to block it, how to mark the delivery as complete, and all that kind of stuff.